Putin is facing a big problem. Siberia wants to break away from Russia. In the summer of 2026, a short video circulating on social media brought to the surface a truth that had long moved only as a whisper. A Siberian woman looks into the camera and speaks plainly.
Why on earth would we need your Moscow, your Slavic, your Slavophilia? We don't need any of that. We want to follow this Asian-style path of development. Do you understand?
And this is not the anger of one person. It is the distillation of a mood that has been building for years among the millions who live in Russia's east, in the Far East. War, sanctions, and the center funneling all its resources westward and to the front have sharpened that feeling still further. So, does Siberia really want to break away from Russia? Or is it China's quiet economic and demographic penetration that is slowly pulling the region into its own orbit? Now we're going to open up this dark contradiction between Beijing and Moscow in all its layers. But first, a small request. Independent geostrategy analysis like this is being suppressed by the algorithm, so the video isn't reaching many of the people it could. Subscribing, liking, and leaving even a single word in the comments directly helps us break through that suppression. It only takes you a few seconds. Now let's begin. To understand the anger of Siberians today, you have to go back a century and a half. In the second half of the 19th century, with the Qing Empire in decline, Russia seized enormous territories north of the Amur and east of the Ussuri, most of today's Amur, Primorye, and Khabarovsk regions, through the 1858 Treaty of Aigun and the 1860 Treaty of Peking. Chinese nationalists still call this roughly 250,000 square mile expanse Outer Manchuria and count it as part of China's century of humiliation. So much so that even Xi Jinping's talk of the Great Rejuvenation is read in some nationalist circles as a call to take back this land. And that memory once spilled into gunfire. In 1969, over a strip of the Ussuri River, smaller than a single square kilometer, Damansky Island, two nuclear powers came to the brink of war, and across 3 clashes through March, each side lost around 70 soldiers. The border dispute was settled in the 2000s, and that island was formally handed to China. But China's argument never changed. The unequal treaties had once stolen Chinese soil. The border on the map closed. The border in people's minds did not. Now let's look carefully at the map, because Siberia's real fragility appears right here. Russia's Far East is twice the size of India, yet its population is under 7 million and has been shrinking steadily since 1991. In some areas, the decline reaches 20%. This single region covers roughly 40% of Russia's territory, but holds less than 6% of its population. And the gap between the two sides of the border stops you in your tracks. In Primorye, Russia's most populous eastern region, there are about 13 people per square kilometer, while just across the line, in northeast China, that number is 58. The 3 Chinese provinces bordering Russia, Heilongjiang with 30 million, Inner Mongolia with 25 million, Jilin with 24 million, each on their own dwarf the entire Russian Far East many times over. This imbalance creates a natural pull. Because Russia's own population cannot close the region's labor gap, migration becomes almost the only realistic source, and that draws in the people just across the border. 4 provinces of northeast China supply roughly 96% of the Chinese migrants coming into the Far East. But the picture here is very open to exaggeration. Official Russian counts put the number of Chinese in the tens of thousands, while independent estimates have spoken since the early 1990s of over 200,000 temporary workers and traders. Claims running into the millions are generally unverified. Most Chinese are not permanent. They work in agriculture, construction and trade, and send their earnings home. And what is emptying is not just a number, it is an identity. Ethnic Russians are leaving the region far faster than other groups, and their place is being filled by Central Asian, North Korean, and Chinese migrants. In some Far Eastern cities, the number of these migrants is already straining the ethnic Russian majority. That is Moscow's deepest fear. An East that grows, year by year, a little less Russian, a little more restive, and that could one day drift toward either outside control or independence. Moscow has not exactly failed to try to reverse this erosion. It offered programs handing out free hectares of land, subsidies, calls to migrate. But the result was a disappointment. Far from drawing people in, the region keeps losing even its own young to European Russia and the big cities. And the larger a vacuum grows, the clearer it becomes which power will fill it. And that power comes not from the west, but from just across the southern border. This demographic vacuum is exactly what China moved into after 2022, once the doors to the west slammed shut. A single figure tells the scale. More than 90% of foreign investment in Russia's Far East now comes from China. Over 53 Chinese companies operating across 18 development zones and 22 ports have planned investment exceeding 800 billion rubles. And this isn't just a list of projects, it's an explosion in volume. After the war, trade between the two countries broke record after record. Border towns like Heihe and Suifenhe turned into logistics hubs, and the backbone of that flow is financed largely by Chinese banks and Chinese capital. So the tie is being woven not only physically, but financially. And Moscow is opening the door to this advance itself. Advanced special economic zones and the free port of Vladivostok were set up specifically for Chinese investment in the Far East. At the 2023 Putin-Xi meeting, a plan for over $160 billion of direct investment across 79 major projects was put on the table. Two giant economic zones are being designed, one on Bolshoy Ussuriysky Island near Khabarovsk, where the state border runs right across it, the other near Vladivostok, where the Chinese border comes within just 15 kilometers of the Sea of Japan. And the most symbolic of these ports carries an irony of history. Vladivostok, Russia's largest gateway to the ocean and ever more central to China's Pacific trade, was Qing territory a century and a half ago, and in Chinese it is still known by its old name, Haishenwai. So China is entering, this time as a merchant, through the very gate it once lost. This advance reaches into the land. Hundreds of thousands of hectares of farmland are leased long-term, and in Amur and Primoria, Chinese-backed soy fields mostly feed the Chinese market. It reaches into resources. Chinese companies extract timber, coal and gold, cutting forests and cutting roads. So much so that illegal logging and environmental damage have in places triggered protests by local people. And a 700 billion ruble railway is being laid to carry coal from Yakutia to China. And the two countries are now being physically stitched together. Over the Amur River, first a road bridge and then rail links were built between Blagoveshchensk and the Chinese city of Heihe on the far bank. A railway bridge between Tongjiang and Nizhne-Leninskoye, another crossing at Jalinda, and, by the end of 2026, the world's first cross-border cable car is expected to open. Add to these the ESPO oil pipeline, the Power of Siberia gas line, even the Zaya and Bureya hydroelectric plants that supply electricity to Chinese territory across the river. The entire infrastructure of the Far East is being rearranged to face east toward China. But the deepest change, the invisible one, happened in the currency. Since 2022, the yuan has effectively dethroned the ruble in the region's trade. And all these projects share a common pattern. Every one of them is designed to carry Russian raw materials to China and to feed Chinese consumption, not to build a value-added economy on the ground. In the experts' language, this is becoming a resource appendage. While Moscow's promise of diversifying into industry and services by 2035 stays on paper, the ground is turning into an ever-barer extraction site. On top of that, key positions in the projects usually go to Chinese specialists, while the promises of local employment hang in the air. This is not an invasion by tanks. It is a silent, patient, economic integration. The most painful face of this integration is visible not on the map of a pipeline, but inside a home. Eastern Siberia has become, in the words of one Russian geographer, a raw material pantry for China. The starkest example is the vast Kvikta field in the Irkutsk region. Nearly all of its 1.8 trillion cubic meters of gas is reserved for the Chinese consumer. So much so that Putin himself opened the field's commissioning by video conference in 2022. The Power of Siberia pipeline pumps this gas eastward at volumes reaching 38 billion cubic meters a year. And the people of Irkutsk sitting right on top of that gas? Only 1% of homes in the region are connected to the gas grid. People still heat with coal and firewood. Officials promise to raise that figure to only around 3% in the coming years, the crumb left to the population while trillions of cubic meters flow across the border. Think about it. People living on the soil of one of the world's largest gas producers cannot get a share of the wealth beneath their feet. The most concrete, most human core of Siberia's "Why Moscow?" anger beats right here. And in the next step, that feeling turns into an identity. And this anger is no longer a passing complaint. It has hardened into an identity. In Siberia, the word Muscovite is almost an insult. The region is rich in resources, but feels forgotten when it comes to roads, hospitals, and schools. As the war pulls its young men and its budget to the front, that feeling has only sharpened. In fact, this feeling is not new at all. Siberia's estrangement from the center runs back to a 19th century current of thought called Oblastnichestvo, which demanded autonomy for the region. So the anger Moscow faces today is not a momentary reaction. It is a century-and-a-half-old discontent surfacing again. Its clearest eruption came in 2020, when their elected governor Sergei Fergal, a man who had no less won against the Kremlin's candidate, was arrested and flown to Moscow, and replaced by an outsider with no ties to the region. Khabarovsk, 6,100 kilometers and 7 time zones from the capital, poured into the streets for months. By some estimates, between 35 and 90,000 people marched carrying the region's flag and chanting, "Putin resign," the largest demonstration in the city's history. It wasn't about one governor, it was about Moscow disregarding their vote. And the war's bill to this region runs far deeper than a budget line. Because Russia draws its soldiers disproportionately from the poorest, most remote ethnic regions. By independent counts, Buryatia and Tuva have the highest death rates relative to population in all of Russia. By some estimates, a man from Buryatia is many times more likely to die at the front than a man from Moscow. While ethnic Russians in Khabarovsk are mobilized at a rate of 34 per 10,000, among indigenous peoples like the Nanai, Nivk, and Udige, that rate jumps to 95 per 10,000. For communities whose total population has only just passed 20,000, this is a direct existential threat. The reason is clear. These regions are poor, jobs are scarce, military bases are plentiful, and drawing soldiers from a distant geography means any potential objection stays far from the capitals. In short, the center is using its own periphery as a reservoir of human beings, and Siberia sees this very clearly. And this unrest is not unique to Khabarovsk. In Bashkortostan, people resisted the mining of hills they hold sacred. In Arkhangelsk, they blocked roads for over a year, camping out against their region being turned into Moscow's garbage dump. In Tatarstan, a slowly growing nationalist movement resists the imposition of Russian and the retreat of the Tatar language. And in the ethnic republics east of the Urals, Buryatia, Yakutia, Altai, a cultural and identity revival is stirring too. Here is what is dangerous. For years, Moscow assumed it could keep Siberians in line by relying on their fear of China. But by handing concessions to Chinese firms itself, it produced with its own hands the very thing it feared most. Siberians are now as angry at Beijing as they are at Moscow. At times, the phrase, "United States of Siberia," is even spoken aloud. These people see China as a success story they cannot join, and Moscow as a force that facilitates that advance rather than halting it. And the irony is this: the harder the center suppresses federalism, the more it feeds regionalism. So just how strong is China in this picture? This is the most deceptive part, because in this relationship, Russia is no longer an equal, but the junior partner. Even Russia's largest energy project shows it. In September 2025, a memorandum was signed for the Power of Siberia 2 line, which would carry 50 billion cubic meters of gas a year through Mongolia. But by 2026, the project stalled over a price chasm. China's offer was so low that Beijing told Moscow to stop raising the subject. The reason is simple. China already buys Russian gas cheap. It pays $240 to $280 per 1,000 cubic meters through the existing line, and $200 from Central Asia. Whereas before the war, Europe paid up to $340 for the same gas. And time is working in China's favor. The first memorandum for this line was signed back in 2006, and in the 2 decades since, China has built liquefied gas terminals, nuclear and hydroelectric plants, wind and solar farms, so it no longer needs this pipeline as much as Russia needs the sale. As Europe exits Russian gas, China has even started buying American gas again. The relationship they call a no-limits partnership suddenly finds its limit the moment it reaches a critical negotiation. And this asymmetry is not confined to a single pipeline. It has worked its way into the entire fabric of the relationship. For every dollar Russia earns, Beijing gains structural leverage. Chinese refiners pay below market, Chinese firms set the technical standards, Chinese banks finance the infrastructure. With every attempt to escape Western isolation, Moscow grows a little more dependent on Beijing. So much so that, by a striking but unverifiable claim, Russian intelligence now reportedly uses the word enemy for the Chinese internally, a sign that behind the theater of no limits, the trust is far from complete. And this dependency doesn't end with gas and infrastructure. A significant share of the microchips, electronic components, and machinery that keep Russia's war industry and civilian economy running now also comes from China. So Beijing is not only Russia's biggest customer, it is at the same time its supplier, its financier, and its standard setter. When a country becomes this dependent on both its buyer and its seller, what becomes clear is not who sits at the table, but who is left standing. Because China's method rests on exactly this patience. There is no open territorial demand. The route, readable in state plans and provincial development documents, is this: to consolidate economic and strategic depth slowly, without ever entering open conflict. The line with which a retired Ukrainian intelligence general sums up this picture is striking. China will swallow Russia without firing a single bullet, and the consequences concern more than Russia alone. If the largest landmass on Earth, one of the planet's richest reservoirs of natural resources, is quietly sliding into the economic orbit of a single power, that means the balance of power across all of Eurasia is being redrawn. While the West is locked onto the front in Ukraine, a far larger piece of the map may be quietly changing hands. Still, we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves here, because this picture has a strong counter-view. Many experts find the "China is swallowing Siberia" narrative wildly exaggerated, because Heilongjiang province on the Chinese side of the border is itself losing population. The people there want to move not to the Siberian frost, but to the warm, wealthy cities of southern China. What's more, as the ruble loses value, the region becomes ever less profitable for Chinese traders, which is why some experts argue that part of the demographic invasion fear is inflated by negative Russian media coverage, and that the Chinese presence may shrink rather than grow in the future. The borders are also legally sealed shut. Beijing makes no official territorial claim and censors those annexation calls itself. And Russia is no passive victim in this relationship. With its 2026 reforms, it restricted foreign participation in strategic areas like uranium, rare earth elements, lithium, cobalt, and nickel. It even set the investment thresholds of the new economic zones high enough to shut out the small and medium Chinese traders who have been most active in border trade. So Moscow is not opening every door to China. It is both inviting the influence and trying to limit it. And there is a real breathing space this relationship gives Russia too. Having lost the Western market, the Far East has been able to stay on its feet amid war and sanctions precisely thanks to Chinese trade and infrastructure. So the picture is not one color. The same dependency, while a threat in the long run, is a lifeline in the short. And finally, the words of the woman in the video are striking, but in the end, they are the voice of a single person. There is no open, organized, separatist movement. Even the migrant figures are contested. They should be read not as precise counts, but as signals pointing in a direction. So the right word to describe this picture is not invasion. More accurately, it is this: a pragmatic but increasingly asymmetric dependency. In the end, Siberia is not breaking away from Russia today, but it is behaving exactly as history behaves when the periphery of an empire begins to lose its faith in the center. While Moscow is sunk in a war in the West, its richest yet most neglected territory, with its money, its pipelines, its bridges, and its young, is quietly sliding into another orbit, into Beijing's orbit. And this is a handover advancing not by an army, but by contract, by patience, and by the yuan. The wound the unequal treaties opened a century and a half ago is bleeding today not through weapons, but through economics. And history's real bitter lesson is perhaps this: once a country begins to treat its own periphery as a colony, it is only a matter of time before that periphery turns to a new master and asks, "So why you?" So what do you think? Will Siberia remain part of Russia in the long run, or will it slide entirely into China's economic orbit? Please share your thoughts in the comments. To stay up to date with PPR Global's in-depth war and geopolitics analyses, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Thank you for choosing us.